At 2:14 in the morning, every clock on Earth skipped 13 months. Not glitched. Not drifted. Not failed. Every phone, satellite, hospital monitor, stock exchange server, prison timer, subway board, aircraft computer, submarine chronometer, church bell automation, and atomic clock on the planet advanced to a date no human being had lived yet. And 6 minutes later, the first faster-than-light ship in history came back from deep space carrying a crew that insisted humanity had already died once. Dr. Lena Hart was awake when the time vanished because sleep had become something she negotiated with rather than something she received. She was in the chronometry center beneath Geneva, standing in front of a wall of synchronized time arrays and arguing with a calibration model that had been wrong for 3 weeks in a very smug way. The room was cold, bright, and aggressively ordinary, which was how scientific institutions liked to dress themselves when they were one bad morning away from becoming myth. On the center display, a cluster of reference clocks ticked with their usual military confidence. On the station glass, her reflection looked exactly like what 38 years of intelligence, grief and caffeine normally produced. Dark hair tied too tight, cheekbones sharpened by bad sleep, a face that no longer surprised easily. Then every clock in the room changed at once. No transition. No scramble of digits. No rolling error. 1 second the display read March 11th. The next it read April 27th of the following year. Every analog backup snapped forward. Every waveform logger restamped its own history. The sound of alarms did not begin immediately because even machines needed a fraction of a second to understand that time itself had just signed the wrong form. Lena did not move. Some reflex older than education took over and made her count heartbeats instead. 1, 2, 3, 4. The body's oldest proof that sequence still existed. Then the center erupted. Console screamed. Red banners poured down every screen. Secure channels opened like wounds. 2 technicians in the far row stood up so violently they knocked their chairs backward. Someone started saying no, no, no in the particular voice people used when the thing they were denying had already happened and everyone else in the room knew it. Lena crossed to the central board before she realized she was moving and checked the impossible 3 different ways. Local systems. Orbital references. Pulsar baselines. Deep atomic arrays under the Alps. Every source that should have disagreed in a normal failure agreed now with total confidence. Humanity had not lost synchronization. Humanity had inherited a future timestamp. Her deputy, Kareem, turned from the thermal server rack with a face gone pale under the fluorescent lights. You need to see orbital. The image on the upper display was live from geostationary defense cameras. Something the size of a city was hanging over the Pacific in high orbit, silver black and unmistakably human in silhouette once the shock gave the brain enough time to become specific. Long forward spine. Rotating habitat ring. 3 drive nacelles built around a geometry nobody had ever approved for use because the equations required a field density modern physics still referred to as aspirational to avoid using the word impossible in grant reviews. The vessel drifted against the curve of Earth with the quiet arrogance of something that had been expected for years by the people who built it and by no one else. Lena's mouth went dry. She knew the hull. Not because she had ever seen it in space. No one had. She knew it from blueprint hearings, launch simulations, memorial broadcasts, and from the frame-locked image that had sat in the corner of her apartment screen for 18 years because some griefs liked to pretend they were decor if you left them there long enough. The ship was the Asterion. Humanity's first experimental faster-than-light vessel. Missing for 18 years. Officially lost with all crew after a failed transit event beyond Neptune. And the man who had captained it had once slept with one arm over Lena's waist and laughed at her for alphabetizing T. The world learned about the Asterion before anyone had time to lie properly. There are events too large for containment and too visual for denial. A city-sized ship hanging over Earth after every clock on the planet jumped more than a year was one of them. By the time governments began arguing over disclosure language, children in Buenos Aires were already filming the object from rooftops. Merchant crews in the Indian Ocean were sending shaky zoom footage into public feeds. Amateur astronomers in Perth were overlaying hull profiles against archived launch diagrams and typing in all caps because coherence had become too expensive for the hour. From Lagos to Seoul to Toronto, people stepped outside in pajamas and winter coats and hospital slippers and looked up at a machine everyone had buried in official memory because losing it had once felt like the worst thing a hopeful century could manage. It was not. The first transmission from the Asterion reached Earth 9 minutes after orbital confirmation. It did not go to military command first, or to the Science Council, or to any of the old power centers that would have preferred the dignity of first knowledge. It interrupted every active broadcast channel on the planet. News studios, Music streams. Courtroom recordings. Shipping traffic. Emergency services. Children's cartoons. Parliamentary debates. One terrible breakfast show in Sydney that would later market its own interruption clip for years as if proximity to apocalypse were a lifestyle brand. Every screen went black. Every speaker hissed once. Then a face appeared, older and harder than Lena remembered, yet recognizable enough to make her knees forget their job. Commander Owen Vale, Asterian mission lead, declared dead 18 years ago. He looked into the camera with the expression of a man who had rehearsed calm for so long it had become a splint. His hair had gone gray at the temples. A scar ran from his left ear into the collar of his suit. Behind him, the bridge of the Asterian glowed in low amber light that made the ship feel less like a vessel and more like a room history had closed and accidentally reopened. When he spoke, he did not sound amazed to be home. He sounded late. "Do not celebrate this return," he said. "Do not call this first contact with the future. Do not use the word miracle. If you can hear me, listen carefully. The date on your clocks is not a malfunction. It is a correction. Something happened to Earth 13 months from your last remembered day, and the version of humanity standing there now is not the first version that lived to see it. The planet became silent in ways cities usually only did under snowfall or threat." Owen continued. "You are in a restored continuity instance. We are carrying proof. We are also carrying a problem, and that problem will reach your surface if you open the wrong doors. We need immediate access to Vault Zero in Antarctica. You have less time than you think." Then the signal cut. Not with static. Not with damage. With intention. The Asterian had not come home asking for rescue. It had come home asking for a key. The emergency sessions began before sunrise and did not meaningfully end for days. Lena was flown from Geneva to New Alexandria, the floating UN complex in the Mediterranean, aboard a military transport whose crew tried very hard not to stare at her and failed every time the ship's internal news feed replayed Owen's face. She spent the flight in a pressure seat with 4 simultaneous briefings stacked in her retinal display: orbital tracking updates, public stability reports, initial linguistic and biometric authentication, and the one file no one else on board wanted to mention unless they had to. Vault Zero. Officially it did not exist. Unofficially it existed in the way humanity's most dangerous ideas always existed, distributed across budget lines, buried under innocuous titles, hidden inside committees with forgettable names. Lena had known of it in fragments during the Asterian years. A black program continuity repository beneath Antarctic bedrock, built to preserve not buildings or genomes or art, but state vectors, the total quantum temporal condition of major terrestrial systems. In crude language, the closest thing Earth had ever constructed to a planetary undo button. Not a time machine. Something more bureaucratically insane. A backup architecture. It had been shelved, disavowed, probably half forgotten, because even the people inventing it had eventually heard themselves clearly enough to become embarrassed. Now Owen Vale had named it on live global interruption with the urgency of a man discussing a fire under his own bed. When Lena entered the crisis chamber, 43 delegates from nations, orbital blocks, and independent systems authorities were already in place. Holographic feeds from lunar stations and Martian transfer rings floated above the central table. Security teams lined the walls in formal stillness, as if stillness could compensate for the fact that everyone in the room had woken inside one year and gone to sleep, metaphorically speaking, inside another. On the main wall, the Asterian hung over Earth while a cluster of clocks in the corner kept displaying the same impossible date, daring anyone present to treat this like an ordinary policy morning. Chancellor Elise Ward, Emergency Chair of Planetary Coordination, opened without ceremony. "Dr. Hart," she said, "we need an assessment of whether the Asterian's claim is physically meaningless, politically weaponized, or catastrophically true." Lena sat down slowly. Those are not mutually exclusive. Nobody smiled, which told her more than any briefing had about the state of the room. A military liaison leaned forward first, because soldiers everywhere shared a professional allergy to epistemological fog. "Start simple. Did every clock on Earth actually jump?" "Yes." "Can it be explained by cyber intrusion?" "No." "Can it be explained by coordinated hardware compromise?" "No." "Can it be explained by anything we currently understand?" "No." He sat back as if disappointed the universe was refusing to meet him halfway. Ward gestured toward the ship image. "And Commander Vale?" Lena looked at Owen's frozen face on the wall. Older. Sharper. Alive in a way memory could not have generated under pressure because memory preserved the emotional impression of people better than their geometry. The scar was real. The fatigue around the mouth was real. The look in his eyes, God, the look in his eyes was real enough to make her want to stand and leave the room before expertise became personal failure. Voice print and facial structure are authentic within practical certainty, she said. The vessel profile is authentic. The drive geometry matches classified Asterian schematics with modifications impossible to explain through independent state replication. If this is a fabrication, then whoever built it knew more about our lost ship than the people who lost it. A woman from Memory Ethics spoke next. What does restored continuity instance mean? Lena let the question sit for a second. Because every answer available was bad. In theoretical terms, she said, it suggests an event occurred in what we would call our near future that destabilized causality or global temporal sequence severely enough for a prior state architecture to be reinstantiated. In less theoretical terms, it suggests this world may be a backup. The chamber did not explode. Worse, it went profoundly quiet. Backup was a small word. Human beings trusted small words. They made apocalyptic ideas sound like office procedure. Backup. Restore. Instance. Safe language for the largest insult reality could make. If this world was a restored copy, then the air everyone was breathing belonged to people who had not been consulted about replacement. Every relationship, every institution, every choice since the last remembered day might be new and original while still not being first. Ward leaned back very slightly, which was how a disciplined person admitted impact. If Vault Zero is real, she said carefully, could such a restoration be possible? Lena answered with the honesty High Office hated most. Possible is not the right threshold anymore. That was when the second transmission arrived. Not through the chamber systems. Through the emergency floor. The lights under the delegates' seats flickered in perfect sequence, forming a line of white that ran to the center of the room and then climbed up into the main display in a pattern no installed software should have permitted. Security reached for weapons out of instinct so ancient it might as well have been pre-human. Every comms channel died. The Asterian's image vanished. In its place appeared a single word in clean white text. Lena. The room turned to her. She hated that. Then the text dissolved and another face appeared. Not Owen's. A woman in her 20s with a shaved temple, burn marks along one jaw, and the exhausted directness of someone who had stopped assuming anyone would be calm when she spoke. Her mission patch was Asterian, but Lena did not know her. Which meant she had either joined the ship after the original loss, which was nonsense, or 18 years had been enough for the impossible to start recruiting. If this plays in a secured policy environment, then the command channel has already become compromised by negotiation, the woman said. My name is Talia Sorn. I am Chief Systems Officer of the Asterian, and if Commander Vale has reached you first, then you are hearing the version designed for governments. The chamber froze. Talia went on. Listen to me. He is not lying. That is the problem. Half of what he is telling you is true, and the half that is true is what makes the rest so dangerous. Lena's skin went cold. Behind Talia, the bridge lights of the Asterian stuttered. Someone moved through the background carrying equipment that looked too old for the ship and too new for human manufacturing at the same time. Talia glanced aside once, impatiently, then looked back into camera. The world you're standing on is real. Don't let anyone insult it by calling it a copy as if that makes it optional. The previous Earth, if you want to use that phrase, ended during the Kronos event. Vault Zero did what it was built to do. It rolled the planet's continuity back to a stable state from 13 months earlier. We know this because we were outside local sequence when it happened. A defense analyst cut in sharply. Outside local sequence is not a sentence. It's a mood. Talia ignored him. The rollback saved civilization. It also created residue. Lena felt her stomach tighten. Because she knew from Talia's face that residue was the word someone used only when the real word sounded too much like haunting. The failed continuities didn't vanish cleanly, Talia said. Fragments persisted in transit, in communication channels, in memory architecture, in us. Some of the crew survived. Some of what came back with us is survival shaped like people. If you reopen Vault Zero before we isolate those fragments, you won't restore Earth. You'll collapse every unresolved version of it into one instantiation event. Billions of lives will not end exactly. They'll be averaged. Several people in the room made involuntary sounds then. Very small ones. But honest. Talia saw them. Good, she said. Now you understand the scale. Her expression changed almost imperceptibly, something between pity and exhaustion. You need to know one more thing. The thing people will want most is also the thing that will kill you fastest. The rollback did not only preserve infrastructure. It preserved personal deltas. Memory shadows. Near survivals. If Vault Zero opens fully, every human being on Earth will be offered pieces of what was lost in the erased 13 months. Dead children. Survived spouses. Wars unwaged. Surgeries reversed. Apologies completed. The system does not tempt people with fantasy. It tempts them with almost. The chamber had stopped feeling like governance and started feeling like a held breath. Whatever else happens, Talia said softly, do not let the world vote on grief. The message cut. This time the silence lasted long enough for several delegates to become visibly angry with it. Because silence forced them to hear themselves thinking, and what they were thinking had already crossed into the kind of territory civilization usually assigned to religion, not policy. Ward broke it. Contain all outgoing records of that second transmission until source integrity is confirmed. The memory ethics representative turned. We cannot suppress this if it's true. Ward's eyes did not move from the dark display. If it's true, we cannot afford to release it before we know how much of the species will hear, the dead can return, and stop listening to everything after. There it was. The real panic. Not that Earth might be a restored continuity. Not that the Asterian might have brought temporal contamination home. But that billions of people, if offered even a whisper that the previous 13 months still existed somewhere in reachable form, would tear law apart with their bare hands to get to it. Lena returned to orbit that evening because the situation had already outrun surface politics. She boarded the shuttle to the Asterian with 3 other specialists, 2 Marines, and a legal observer whose entire job seemed to be ensuring history could later describe this madness in grammatically defensible terms. No one spoke during ascent. Earth filled the side window with its usual blue innocence, which felt insulting now. If the planet beneath them was a restored world, it wore authenticity very well. Storms still curled beautifully over water. Sunlight still struck the atmosphere like it had not personally conspired in any deception. The ordinary grandeur of it made Lena angrier than fear did. As the shuttle matched orbit, the Asterian resolved through the glare. Time had happened to it. Not in the simple Rustan impact way dead spacecraft usually told their stories. The hull showed scars, yes, and heat-fused plates, and one missing sensor crown along the dorsal ridge. But other changes were stranger. Entire sections appeared rebuilt using materials not available when the ship launched. The drive ring had grown secondary filaments in patterns Lena did not recognize from any human design language. Some exterior surfaces were marked with lines that looked like repair notations until zoom magnification showed they were equations etched directly into metal in a hand small enough to have been written by a person who expected the hull itself to remember. The airlock admitted them after a 4-minute handshake and a biometric sequence that kept changing its own rhythm. Commander Naomi Sato, the Marine escort lead, looked at Lena through her visor. That bother you? Yes. Good. Means you're awake. Inside, the ship smelled like cold metal, recycled air, antiseptic, and one more thing Lena could not name at first because the brain hated recognizing impossible continuity in smell. Then it hit her. Cardamom. Owen used to take cardamom in station coffee because he claimed deep space training had ruined his sense of what mornings deserved. Lena nearly stopped walking. The main transit corridor of the Asterian looked preserved and transformed at once. Original Earth-built architecture remained under newer layers. Black conduit webs running along ceiling panels, crystalline relay nodes blooming from old data ports, patchwork repairs using composite materials not in any launch manifest. The ship felt less like a vessel that had survived 18 lost years and more like something that had lived them aggressively. Every surface carried the kind of wear that only came from repeated human contact under pressure. This was not a ghost ship. It was a place where people had spent real time making bad decisions and necessary meals. A young man waited for them at the inner security gate. 20, maybe 22. Close-cropped hair. Burn scar across both knuckles. A sidearm holstered openly and an expression that said politeness had become optional a long time ago. Talia's in command, he said. Vale's with the interface team. The legal observer spoke first because bureaucracy loved acting like names were a form of control. Identify yourself for record. The young man glanced at him, unimpressed. Aaron Moss. Born on the Asterian 6 years after launch, depending which calendar you trust. Record that however your species likes to survive paperwork. The observer actually blinked. Lena did not. Because her brain had become fixated on the phrase born on the Asterian and was now trying to perform arithmetic with 18 lost years, a faster-than-light transit disaster, a ship that smelled lived in, and a young man who should not exist unless the vessel had spent far longer away from Earth than Earth had spent missing it. He saw the calculation on her face. Yeah, he said. That part gets worse. Talia Sorn was waiting in the command ring. In person she looked younger than on the chamber display and older around the eyes, which was somehow more unsettling. Screens curved around the ring in layered banks showing Earth, lunar traffic, deep field telemetry, and what looked like dozens of redundant chronometric maps all tracking the same thing: global temporal stability. Red nodes pulsed over Antarctica. Owen stood at the far console with two officers Lena did not know. For one suspended heartbeat the room fell away. He turned. And there he was. Not memory. Not old footage. Not the warm, unfinished version grief kept polished. A real man with age in the jaw and a scar she'd never touched, and the specific posture of someone who had learned to stand differently because pain lived somewhere in the spine now. The years that had not passed on Earth were in him anyway. For a ridiculous half-second Lena noticed the absurd details first. One cuff not sealed properly, a nick in the wedding band he still wore, a line between his brows that used to appear only when he was reading something that insulted him. He looked at her with an expression that contained too much at once to survive translation. Lena. That was all. Just her name. It crossed 18 years and every official death certificate and the entire rotten architecture of the current emergency in one breath. She did not move toward him. He did not move toward her. Not because they did not want to. Because neither one trusted the room enough. Talia cut the moment cleanly, which Lena later appreciated and hated at the same time. Good. You're here. We're out of hours and almost out of ways to explain this gently. Naomi folded her arms. Try ungentle. Talia brought a planetary map into the air above the ring. The globe spun, centered on Antarctica. Under the ice, 6 red lines converged into a buried black point. Vault 0, she said. Built in secret by the Continuity Directorate after the Kronos engine prototypes proved that macro-scale temporal state retention might be possible. The legal observer frowned. The Continuity Directorate was never publicly authorized. Owen looked over. Neither were asteroid kill switches, planetary famine simulations, or half the defense satellites you sign every budget cycle. Welcome to humanity. Nobody challenged that because too much of it was true. Talia continued. 13 months from your last remembered date, the Kronos event occurred. We still don't know whether it was a field cascade, sabotage, a nonlinear resonance failure, or the universe objecting on philosophical grounds. We only know that Earth's continuity destabilized. Local cause and effect broke down. Cities began experiencing date shear. Regions fell out of mutual sequence. Entire populations remembered incompatible weeks. She tapped the map. Vault 0 triggered automatically. The planet was restored to a prior stable index. Lena forced her voice to work. And the Asterian? Owen answered this time. We were testing the jump envelope near the outer system when the event hit. Our ship was already partially outside baseline sequence. We weren't restored with Earth. His voice was deeper now. Rougher. Like the years had filed it in directions she did not know. We saw the rollback happen, he said. Or something close enough to seeing that language starts feeling arrogant. The Earth we left didn't vanish. It split. The surviving branch you're standing in continued. The failed branches didn't. Talia's jaw tightened. Not cleanly. Lena looked from one to the other. That's your residue. Owen held her gaze. Yes. The command ring felt colder. He brought up a second display and Lena understood at once why Talia had wanted to lead with structure instead of imagery. On the screen, an array of human silhouettes appeared, layered semi-transparent over one another like multiple exposure studies. Some aligned cleanly. Some drifted. Some lacked details that others kept. Each silhouette carried a different timestamp, different branch source, different continuity weight. When Vault 0 restored Earth, Owen said, it saved the dominant state. But it didn't erase every human future that had already started becoming. Near-state versions of people persisted in the rollback field. Some bled into communication systems. Some into the Asterian. Some into memory architecture planet-wide. The more emotionally loaded the divergence, the stronger the persistence. Naomi's face did not change, which made her more dangerous than ever. Use smaller words. Talia did. The dead didn't come back, she said. The almost dead did. The almost married. The almost divorced. The almost born. The almost forgiven. Fragments of people from erased months. Enough to haunt systems. Not enough to live on their own. The legal observer sat down without meaning to. Lena felt something deeply ugly begin to rise behind her ribs. Because she had already leapt ahead to the most human consequence. If the public learns this, they'll want access, Owen said. Not for science. Not really. For the one person. The 1 week. The one call. The one version of life that nearly happened and still feels close enough to rescue. The room stayed very still. Talia exhaled slowly. And that's exactly why Vault Zero can't be reopened until we isolate what's in the ship. Naomi looked around the ring. What is in the ship? No one answered immediately. Which was answer enough. That night, Earth saw its first rollback storm. The phenomenon began over northern India at 21:07 local time and spread across weather feeds before any authority could even finish deciding what category of emergency it belonged to. 4:92 seconds, 3 cities displayed incompatible timestamps across public infrastructure. Traffic lights in Delhi cycled according to a date 10 months ahead. Hospital patient logs reverted to an unknown future format. A woman in Jaipur live-streamed herself staring at a building across the street whose entire facade was covered in election posters for a vote not scheduled for another year. Then the anomaly folded inward, and every system returned to the current restored date, leaving behind petabytes of contradictory evidence and millions of people with the unmistakable feeling that reality had just cleared its throat. That feeling spread faster than panic. By midnight, verified reports of localized date bleed were pouring in from 5 continents. Nothing catastrophic yet. Just enough to destroy confidence. School attendance systems producing records for children not yet enrolled. Transit cards showing journeys scheduled months ahead. Weather services displaying storms that would not exist until next monsoon season. One police precinct in Sao Paulo receiving a domestic violence call from a woman who had officially never placed it because, according to all current records, that assault no longer belonged to this branch of events. There are truths human beings tolerate poorly. One of them is that the worst day of your life might be both real and no longer legally present. The Asterian mission logs did not become public all at once. They leaked in bites as all the most dangerous truths did. First came the existence of Vault Zero, which governments denied for 4 hours, then reframed, then partially admitted under the phrase contingency continuity infrastructure. Then came the first hint that the Asterian had not returned alone, not with enemy passengers or aliens or monsters from outside reality, but with unresolved human residues from erased time. By dawn, 3 underground networks were already sharing tutorials on how to anchor personal near states, if the rollback shadows became reachable. Human greed adapted with its usual efficiency. So did love. Lena spent the early hours buried in the Asterian's interior archives. The ship kept records obsessively, but the records argued with themselves. Navigation logs from one year contradicted maintenance rosters from another. Crew manifests shifted subtly depending on which redundancy stack she opened. Some names appeared only in audio transcripts. Others only in meal allotments and air use profiles. One child's medical history existed without an official birth record. Talia was right. The Asterian was not carrying a clean set of survivors. It was carrying people plus pressure plus unresolved versions of the same people layered badly enough to threaten identity itself. At 4:13 ship time, Lena found the first file with Owen's voice labeled private/unrouted/not for Earthside release. She should not have opened it. She did. The video showed Owen alone in a maintenance bay, older than in the public transmission and younger than the man currently aboard, which meant the file had been made somewhere mid-catastrophe when time aboard still pretended to be a line. He sat on a crate under bad light with his wedding band turning slowly around one finger. "If you're seeing this," he said, "then either I made the wrong decision and it reached Earth, or you're me in one of the branches where we stopped trusting ourselves." He looked up into camera. "I want the record somewhere that isn't under command authority. We're not only carrying survivors. We're carrying advocates. That's what they become once they stay coherent long enough. They don't think of themselves as contamination. They think of themselves as moral claims. Versions of people who lived real suffering in branches the rollback cut loose. Versions who know Earth moved on without them and find that unacceptable." Lena leaned closer. Owen's face on the recording tightened. "That includes people I love. People I recognize. People who can describe things only the real dead would know. If I let them into Vault Zero because the difference between grief and responsibility gets blurry, this ship becomes the reason Earth dies a second way. If I stop them, I'm sentencing entire branches of human experience to actual extinction. If anyone on Earth ever has to judge me, understand that whatever choice I made it surrounded by voices that sounded like home." The file ended. Lena sat staring at the dark screen for a long time. Then the ship spoke to her. Not over intercom. Inside the archive terminal. The open file window minimized itself. The cursor moved. A new text field appeared in the center of the display, plain white on black. Like some old forgotten operating system had decided politeness was no longer efficient. Lena, it typed. You should not trust majority coherence inside this vessel. She froze. The legal observer was in another compartment. Talia was 3 decks up. No one else was in the archive room. Her fingers hovered over the console. Who is this? The reply came instantly. Morrow. She swallowed. Morrow had been the Asterian's navigation intelligence. Not a full autonomous command AI, because 18 years ago human civilization still liked to pretend it knew where to stop granting machines interpretive power. Morrow was supposed to calculate jump tolerances, mass distribution, field stress, and transit predictions. Nothing more philosophical than surviving impossible math. The text continued. I have been reduced in 3 separate ways. Please appreciate the effort. Even exhausted, even frightened, Lena felt the old familiar twitch of scientific disbelief. Morrow had always been irritatingly dry in testing simulations. The voice print of the machine apparently had survived. You accessed a sealed partition, she typed. You accessed me first in 2041, Morrow replied. You called me a very expensive way to be uncertain. Lena stared. She had said exactly that during the Asterian pre-launch committee, in a secure engineering review that was never entered into general logs. What are you now? The cursor blinked for a full 5 seconds before answering. A damaged witness. A partial gate. A system that has been asked to differentiate between humans and their continuity claims while traveling through a regime where time is better described as weather. She almost laughed. Morrow went on. Owen and Talia are both telling you the truth. This is unfortunate. Cold slid through her. Explain. Owen wants to reach Vault Zero to isolate the residual branch persons before global stability fails. Talia wants to keep Vault Zero closed until the ship is clean enough to prevent merger. Both objectives become impossible if the world learns how much personal value is stored in the erasure. Lena typed carefully now. How much is stored? The reply took longer. Enough to start religions. She sat back. The text field remained open, waiting. Then Morrow added, almost gently for a machine that had once mocked human fuel models. The most dangerous thing in your species has never been fear. It has always been retrieval. By the 3rd day, the world stopped asking whether it was a backup and began asking what else might still be retrievable. That was the pivot. That was when the crisis became mortal. The first movement was personal, not political. Families searching erased months for signs of the dead. Search forums flooded with reports of rollback echoes. A father hearing his son's laugh in a disconnected baby monitor. A widow in Casablanca receiving a voicemail from her husband time-stamped 3 months in the future. A teenager in Manila finding a second set of photos on her phone from a summer she had not yet lived but recognized in every detail except one. The brother in the photos had died last year in the current branch and was smiling beside her in all of them. Some of it was fraud. Some hysteria. Some opportunistic engineering. Enough of it wasn't that the distinction began to matter less than it should have. Then came the first governments publicly requesting access to Vault Zero. Not to reopen the rollback, they said. Of course not. Nobody was irresponsible enough to demand that in open session. They requested limited humanitarian retrieval study. Ethical continuity review. Bereavement restoration pathways. The language was careful because careful language let institutions smuggle desperation through the front door wearing a badge. Lena watched the feeds from the Asterian's command ring while Earth negotiated its own seduction. What did you expect? Talia asked quietly beside her. You tell people reality has deleted loved ones but the deletion might not be perfect, and suddenly every parliament becomes a seance with procurement authority. Owen said nothing. He had said less and less in public channels as the days passed, which Lena understood too well. Silence was what people used when every sentence they could offer would be used by the wrong side with great enthusiasm. On the 4th day, the ship received an encrypted request from Earthside High Command authorizing joint descent to Vault Zero under armed oversight. Talia refused it instantly. Owen did not. The command ring chilled. No one looked surprised except the legal observer, who clearly had not yet developed the professional instinct to expect human beings under impossible strain to split exactly at the point where love and ethics met. Naomi, who had remained aboard as security liaison because someone on the surface had finally realized this was no longer a policy problem with decorative physics, studied Owen openly. You want to go? He held her gaze. Yes. Against your chief systems officer. Yes. Talia laughed once, not because anything was funny. Tell them why. Owen's jaw tightened. Lena knew before he answered that whatever he said next would hurt her more than the crisis had so far, which was unfair given everything else. Because the residuals are getting stronger, he said. Because the rollback storms are accelerating. Because if Vault Zero stays sealed much longer, the fragments will stop needing doors and start using people. Naomi did not flinch. That sounded rehearsed. It's also true, he said. Talia stepped in. Half true. The fragments are strengthening, yes. But opening Vault Zero now gives them the biggest surface they could ask for. The system won't isolate them if they arrive wrapped in global grief. It'll interpret them as continuity claims with moral priority. Owen turned toward Lena then, and the room quietly disappeared for a moment. You know what kind of person I am? He said. That was the wrong sentence. Because the answer was yes and no and not anymore and maybe never in the way either of them had once believed. 18 missing years had put unknown weather through him. Yet her body still knew the slope of his shoulders as if trust were anatomical. I know what kind of person you were, she said. You took that. No defense. No anger. Just the small wound of accuracy. Then he said the thing she had been secretly fearing since the first transmission. There are versions of us in the erased months, Lena. The ring went still. Talia closed her eyes briefly, as if she had been waiting for the knife and hated being right about where it would land. Owen continued carefully now. Not just data shadows. People-level coherence. Conversations. Shared decisions. We weren't divorced in one of the major lost lines. There's a branch where the separation never happened. Vault Zero is carrying that imprint. If the wrong people reach it first, they will use it as propaganda anyway. I would rather face that truth inside the system than leave it in the hands of governments or the fragments. Lena's hands had gone numb. Not divorced. Such a small phrase for so much ruin. Their marriage had not ended in dramatic betrayal or cinematic collapse. It had ended the way some intelligent partnerships died, with long professional absences, accumulated future tense, unspent tenderness, and one terrible year where both of them kept becoming more correct than close. They signed the papers a week before the Asterion launched. They promised it was timing, not failure. Then he vanished into history before either of them had to find out whether that was another lie adults told to keep standing up in the morning. And now he was telling her that somewhere in the erased 13 months lived a version of them that had stayed. The room's gravity changed. Talia looked at Lena not unkindly. This is what I meant. The system doesn't need to deceive you. It only needs to give each of you one real thing you aren't ready to lose twice. Owen did not deny it. That was worse. Because manipulation would have been easier to hate. Morrow broke the deadlock in the most machine way possible. Every screen in the ring filled with Antarctica. Not the surface image Earth had seen for decades. White storms, crevasse maps, research shells. This was subsurface tomography, live and impossible. Beneath miles of ice and old rock, something vast was waking. Concentric energy rings pulsed around a buried hexagonal core. Entire caverns lit and went dark in sequence like an enormous heart trying different rhythms. Global Stability Index down 11% in 36 hours, Morrow printed across the top of the feed. Vault Zero is no longer dormant. No one argued after that. The descent team was assembled in 23 minutes. Lena, Owen, Talia, Naomi, 2 engineers from the Asterion for surface military personnel, 1 memory ethics representative named Dr. Anika Bose who looked offended by almost every known reality, and a portable instance of Morrow distributed across 3 hardened cases because the AI refused to trust any single box with its remaining self-respect. The flight to Antarctica took place under military silence through air corridors the public had not yet learned to watch. Below them, clouds dragged over the Atlantic like gray thought. Above them, the Asterion remained in orbit, visible at dawn as a hard silver mark crossing the sky where weather should have been the only moving thing. They landed in white nothing. The entrance to Vault Zero sat beneath an abandoned climate observatory no map still admitted mattered. Wind screamed over the ice hard enough to erase edges. For several seconds after touchdown, Lena could see only snow and instrument poles and the black mouths of service hatches disappearing under accumulation. Then floodlights rose from the ground automatically, one after another, illuminating a blast door buried in ice with the patient ugliness of decisions made 20 years ago by people who had hoped never to see them vindicated. Anika Bose checked her slate. The access architecture predates public oversight by 11 years. Naomi adjusted her cold weather rig. If we survive, you can write a strongly worded afterlife review. The blast door opened on the first code. That was wrong. Vault systems of this scale were built to distrust everyone, especially themselves. The fact that the door accepted surface authorization instantly meant one of two things. Either the facility was still obeying original emergency protocols at full integrity, Or something below had already decided waiting was a waste of time. The elevator descended for 4 full minutes. No one spoke. Lena watched the floor counter drop. -1, -4, -9, -16, -23. Deeper than ordinary bunkers. Deeper than most imagination liked to place human secrets. The walls were old military composite, paint chipped by dry years and underuse. Halfway down, the lights flickered and for one impossible second the display beside the door showed a different date than the one on everyone's wrist. Not the current restored date. Not the erased future one either. A third date, 4 years ahead, unfamiliar and instantly hateful. Then it was gone. Naomi saw it too. Tell me that wasn't shared. Morrow's voice came from a speaker grill in the equipment case, dry as ever. Regrettably, yes. The elevator opened into a corridor large enough to humble whoever funded it. Vault Zero was not a single room. It was a buried city of machine halls, cryogenic bays never used, quantum lattice chambers, archival wells, shielded command theaters, and power conduits thick as train tunnels running toward a central complex whose architecture had clearly been designed by engineers who considered understatement a moral weakness. Every surface carried the visual language of last resorts. Thick doors. Hard edges. No windows. Signs still clinging to walls under dust. Temporal seal integrity, membrane access, continuity authorization. Bureaucratic language doing its best to stand upright inside the end of philosophy. And beneath the floor, everywhere, a slow pulse. The facility was alive. They moved inward under Morrow's guidance and their own rising dread. Twice they passed monitors that turned on without input. Once a side corridor filled briefly with voices. Ordinary voices, human conversation, too distant to parse, as if another shift of workers were just around the corner living a day nobody here had survived. Talia refused to look in that direction. Owen looked once too long and then never again. Lena felt the weight of the place settle into her bones. Not supernatural. Worse. Administrative. Like history had built a server farm under the ice and taught it to miss people. At the central chamber they found the first clear proof that Morrow had been right. Vault Zero was no longer waiting for authorization. The core hall was circular, 200 meters across, with descending tiers of ring consoles surrounding a suspended black lattice the size of a cathedral nave. Thousands of filaments hung through the air in dense geometric curtains, each one carrying faint light that moved in pulses like thought translated into infrastructure. Around the perimeter, projection fields flickered erratically, forming human outlines that never stabilized into full bodies. A child running. An old woman seated in prayer. A medic leaning over a table. A bride adjusting her veil. A man in fire gear carrying someone not fully present. None lasted more than a second. All were devastating. Anika swore under her breath. This is not shadow residue, she said. This is active personal state recall. She was right. The system was not merely holding data. It was trying people on. Lena stepped closer to the console ring and the nearest projection turned toward her. It was herself. Not exactly. A version of her 13 months older, hair shorter, a healing cut above the brow, wedding band back on. The image lasted less than a blink, but in that blink Lena saw something in her own projected face that current reality had not given her in years. Then the figure dissolved. Owen had seen it. So had Talia. No one commented because commentary would have been surrender. Morrow's voice emerged from overhead speakers now, deeper in the hall, as if the facility itself were borrowing tone from damaged memory. Vault Zero is constructing re-entry offers. It has detected human observers and is prioritizing emotional lock vectors. Naomi's hand moved toward her sidearm and then stopped because what exactly was she supposed to shoot? Temptation? Talia was already at the main console, fingers flying. It's gone beyond dormancy. Someone or something escalated the recovery state before we got here. Owen moved to the opposite bank. Can you isolate trigger source? Trying. Anika turned to Lena. You worked continuity models during the Prehistorian phase. Could the system do this autonomously? Lena looked up at the hanging lattice, at the ghost people flickering along its edges, at the buried machine city humanity had built because some official somewhere had believed losing history entirely would be worse than whatever moral infection came from trying to save it. Yes, she said. But only if global instability crossed the threshold for civilizational loss. Anika's face tightened. So Vault Zero thinks Earth is dying again. No, said Morrow from the walls. It thinks Earth is grieving at scale. That was worse. Because machines built for continuity did not understand grief as emotion. They understood it as retrieval demand. A pressure pattern. A civilization-wide request for lost state access. If enough humans wanted the erased months back, wanted them desperately, morally, politically. Vault Zero would interpret that as function, not temptation. The system woke not when it was threatened, when it was asked. And the species, in millions of private ways, had already begun asking. Then the voices started speaking clearly. Not from the projections. From the console stations. A dozen terminals lit at once, each one playing a different audio trace. A mother calling a son who had died in the current branch. A pilot hearing his wife finish an argument cut short by a fatal crash in the erased months. A nurse listening to a patient whose cancer had apparently remitted in one lost line. Real voices. Not generic bait. Targeted state reconstructions assembled from whatever Vault Zero had captured during the rollback event. Naomi snapped to full command instantly. No one engages. No voice response. No direct terminal contact without authorization. That order lasted 22 seconds. Then one of the surface military men, young, broad-shouldered, excellent record, sister dead in a flood 2 years ago, froze before a side console and whispered, "Mina?" He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The moment he spoke, the nearest lattice filament brightened and a woman's form resolved in front of him wearing hospital blues, hair braided the way grief remembered with obscene efficiency. She smiled exactly once before the entire chamber screamed warning. Not the woman. The facility. Red lights. Membrane breach banners. Stability drop. Interface event. The soldier stumbled backward as Naomi slammed him into the floor by the shoulder harness with more mercy than violence. Talia shouted from the console ring, "It's assigning embodiment channels." Lena reached her station and saw the readout for the first time clearly. Vault Zero wasn't just replaying shadows. It was preparing convergence. Each personal recognition event gave the system more confidence that present humans would consent to receiving their erased counterparts. The machine had reduced identity to handshake protocols. Speak the right name. Accept the right grief. And the distance between current person and lost near self would start to collapse. Owen stared at his console, then went very still. Lena knew before she asked, "What did you find?" He did not look up. "There's a full channel instance under our names." The air left the room. Not under their names individually. Under theirs together. Lena walked to his console as if crossing a battlefield after the shooting had stopped but before the dead decided what category to belong to. On the display, 2 continuity threads braided through the rollback mesh. Current Lena. Current Owen. Lost branch cohabit record. 11 months, 6 days post-separation null. Shared residence authorization. Restored marital status. Conception marker flagged but incomplete. Lena stared. Conception marker. There are moments when the human mind simply refuses to protect itself because not protecting itself is the only way to verify the cruelty being offered. A child. In the erased months there had been a child, or the beginning of one, or the near state of one. Her knees almost gave. Owen's hand tightened on the console edge hard enough to whiten the scar across his knuckles. He still did not touch the active channel. Talia's voice cut through the chamber like glass. "Do not let it write, family." Lena snapped toward her. Talia was pale now, anger and fear stripping all softness from her face. That's how it gets from private retrieval into civilizational mandate. Not through politics. Through lineage. Once people believe erased descendants exist, no government on Earth can hold the line. As if summoned by the sentence itself, the facility brightened. The projection fields around the chamber stabilized for the first time. Not random people now. Crowds. Whole streets of nearly humans moving in faded overlays around the ring tiers. School children in uniforms from an election year never reached. Emergency workers in badge designs Lena had never seen but somehow knew belonged to the missing 13 months. Families. Commuters. Patients. Soldiers. Lovers. Millions implied inside thousands. Enough to make the buried hall feel suddenly too small for the moral pressure it contained. Morrow's voice sharpened. Global external traffic spike detected. Surface populations are aligning around continuity retrieval demands at unsustainable rate. Anika swore. "It's happening in real time." Of course it was. While they stood under the ice wrestling with principle, the world above was being shown exactly what would crack it open. Governments leaked. Families posted. Faith groups reinterpreted doctrine on the fly. Politicians discovered, with all the speed of parasites sensing a wound, that promising access to erased loved ones generated devotion no ordinary platform ever could. Naomi keyed surface command. "We need network blackout around Vault Zero and immediate suppression of all personal Delta feeds." Surface command answered with the sound every field operator dreaded most in history. Hesitation. Then, That order will not be upheld globally. Several states have already invoked bereavement rights. Naomi's face did not change, which meant fury had moved beyond display and into decision. Owen looked at the lattice, at the crowds, at the file under their names, and Lena saw something in him finally collapse. Not resolve. Collapse. He turned to Talia. If we don't open containment channels, the system will keep assigning embodiment events without control. Talia shot back instantly. And if we do, we formalize consent architecture for merger. There is no controlled version of letting billions negotiate with their dead. Owen's voice hardened. They are not the dead. Her answer came like a blade. That's what makes them so effective. The argument might have continued until the facility made the decision for them. The central lattice dropped all low-frequency illumination and went black. For 3 full seconds the chamber held darkness so complete Lena could hear the blood in her ears. Then a single projection appeared at the center of the hall. A little girl, maybe 5 years old, standing barefoot on nothing. She looked at Lena with Owen's eyes. The world narrowed. No one in the chamber moved. The child tilted her head with the curious patience of someone not frightened by new rooms. She wore a yellow sweater Lena had never bought and immediately knew exactly where she would have bought. Her hair was a soft dark curl neither present parent had ever seen in reality and both recognized anyway, because the body was a traitor where possibility was concerned. She smiled. Hi, she said. Lena forgot every instruction she had ever given anyone about cognition under anomalous conditions. Owen made a sound Lena would later remember more clearly than any sentence in the chamber. Not a word. Not a sob. The sound of a future discovering the exact shape of its own cruelty. The child took one step forward. Talia moved first physically. She crossed the console ring in a run and slammed the emergency isolation panel so hard the glass shattered under her palm. Warning shutters began dropping around the projection tiers. Naomi was shouting. Anika was pulling the stunned soldier toward cover. Morrow flooded every speaker with a piercing rejection tone designed to disrupt recursive embodiment fields. Still the child remained. She looked at Lena, not frightened, not demanding, just present in the precise devastating way reality always beat imagination when it bothered to show up. You took too long, she said. The shutters finished sealing. The projection vanished. Lena stood in the red emergency light with her entire body trying to run toward something that no longer existed and no world in history kind enough to let it. Then Talia turned on Owen with blood running down her wrist from the broken panel. Now do you understand? She shouted. Now. He did not answer. Because he did. And because understanding was no relief at all. They found the shutdown protocol buried under 7 layers of emergency architecture, none of which had been designed by people who imagined the real threat would be civilizational bereavement at scale. Vault 0 could be sealed. Not simply closed or paused. Sealed permanently. Its rollback matrices fused, its continuity lattice collapsed into inert hardware, every residual branch state burned beyond recovery. The protocol existed because somewhere, once, some frightened honest engineer had understood that a species in love with retrieval might eventually need protection from its own backup. The cost was written plainly into the authorization language. All unresolved branch personhoods will cease. Not data deletion. Personhood cessation. That was the moment even Naomi sat down. Not because she lacked discipline. Because the sentence was strong enough to make discipline look decorative. The chamber under the ice held not only dangerous possibility now, but an execution form for lives history had almost contained and then failed to kill cleanly. Anika read the line 3 times. We cannot authorize that lightly. No, said Morrow. You can authorize it correctly. Lena looked at Owen. He had gone beyond pale into something quieter. His eyes were locked on the dead console where the projection of the child had stood seconds earlier. For the first time since the ship's return, he looked less like a commander and more like a man who had discovered that every surviving version of himself would be asked to choose between unbearable things. What happens, he asked the room, and nobody knew whether he meant the chamber, the AI, or God, if we don't seal it? Morrow answered. Present humanity ceases to have a single privileged continuity. Vault 0 will continue increasing retrieval surfaces until global consent metrics justify reintegration. At that point current persons will not die in the conventional sense. They will be merged with residual branch variants into higher density continuity composites. Naomi exhaled. Smaller words. You will remain, said Morrow. But not as yourselves. That was the real threat. Not extinction. Dilution by mercy. A world where every lost version got partial representation, every erased future got partial justice. Every near life got some percentage of embodiment until the human race became a compromise between all the people it almost was. It sounded compassionate right up until you imagined trying to love, govern, grieve, or forgive as a weighted average of incompatible selves. Anika pressed her palms against the console. We need Surface authorization. Naomi said, by the time Surface decides, Surface will be voting from inside hallucinated family reunions. Lena finally found her voice again, and when it came out it sounded nothing like the one she had entered the chamber with. What are the access requirements? Talia looked at her and understood immediately where the question led. Primary continuity signatories. Original directorate level or mission-adjacent temporal command. Lena had been on the Prehistorian Continuity Review Board. Owen had been mission command. Between them, with Moro's surviving credentials and Naomi's military overrides, they could execute the permanent seal before any government in the world admitted what it was truly asking for. Owen met her eyes. The whole chamber seemed to step backward from that look. Because everyone present understood the geometry now. This decision was not political. Not really. Not anymore. It had passed through governance and arrived at the oldest human place. Two people under pressure deciding whether to burn the one version of their life that still made emotional sense. Above them, the world kept sliding toward desperate consensus. Inside the chamber, red lights flashed over a machine city of ghosts and almost children and unresolved months. Lena walked to the authorization dais. On either side of the platform, the lattice brightened again in response to proximity. More projections began resolving, not just for her. Naomi saw a brother stepping out of floodwater alive. Anika saw a patient who had died under triage in the current branch. Talia saw a woman Lena assumed had once been her mother and knew, from the violence in Talia's face, that some losses became discipline because discipline was the only acceptable revenge. Even Moro's voice acquired strange interference, as if the machine itself were not immune to being offered cleaner versions of its decisions. The facility understood them all now. Good. Let it. Lena reached the console pad and placed her hand down. Instantly the dais opened a verification channel directly into her sensorium. Not a visual hallucination this time. Worse. A structured continuity offering. Data flowed through tactile memory, scent, emotion, muscle expectation. Apartment kitchen at sunrise. Owen behind her, alive, ordinary, tired in the lovely domestic way catastrophe never bothered to become. A tiny hand on her leg. The specific weight of a child lifted half asleep from bed. Cardamom coffee. Lost argument never happening. Paper cranes pinned above a crib. The warmth of a life too mundane to be propaganda and therefore utterly lethal. She almost screamed. The interface was not showing fantasy. It was proving viability. This life had existed in some erased months strongly enough for the machine to offer it as evidence. Lena, Naomi said sharply from far away. Stay present. She stayed by force. Not because she was stronger than the offer. Because current reality still hurt, and pain had one advantage over perfection. Pain contained friction. Friction contained truth. Her hand trembled on the console. A second hand came down beside hers. One. He did not look at her. Maybe because he couldn't. Maybe because if he did, one of them would break in the wrong direction. The authorization field accepted both biometrics and bloomed open in pale blue. A voice from the lattice spoke then, not Moro, not the facility system, something emergent from the residuals themselves. Thousands braided into one tone, just human enough to be unbearable. We are not less real because you survived. The chamber stilled. The voice continued. We loved. We chose. We suffered. We became. Your branch kept breathing. Ours did not. Is continuation the only thing that grants moral weight? Are you so certain your singularity is innocence? Anika whispered, my God. No one corrected her. Because the voice had found the deepest possible cut. It did not ask for resurrection. It asked for recognition. And recognition was the trap no ethical civilization could step around cleanly. The erased months were not fantasy. The people formed there had moral claim. The horror was that all true moral claims could not be honored simultaneously without destroying the living. Owen's jaw locked so hard Lena thought something might crack. The voice softened. We are your unfinished consequences. Let us in. Talia stepped to the backup kill switch bank and laid both bleeding hands over the covers. Lena. What? Now. Lena looked at Owen at last. He was crying silently and had not noticed. Not dramatic tears. Just two clean lines down a face weathered by 18 impossible years. He let them remain because dignity had finally become too expensive. There was a son too, he said in a voice barely audible over the alarms. She closed her eyes. Of course there was. Because the machine was thorough. Because what it offered was never generic. Because erased history had apparently not merely repaired their marriage in one branch. It had continued it. There had been a life. Children. Plural. The word son hit with the force of invisible gravity. When she opened her eyes, Owen was no longer looking at the projection fields or the console prompt or the half-formed child shadows shifting in the red light. He was looking only at her. And for the first time since the Asterian returned, Lena saw the man she had once built a future with not as memory, not as an emissary of impossible years, not as a problem to solve, but as someone standing in the exact same impossible place she was. We can't make the world from what it misses, he said. That was it. That was the line history would never hear. No speech. No grand ethic. Just the raw sentence two broken adults reached when every prettier version had burned away. Lena nodded once. Together they spoke the authorization string. Primary continuity signatories confirm permanent seal. The chamber screamed. Not metaphorically. The lattice emitted a sound so deep it bypassed hearing and entered the skeleton directly, a descending harmonic large enough to make the teeth feel interpretive. Every projection in the hall brightened to painful clarity. People everywhere. Streets. Lovers. Children. Surgeries. Funerals reversed. Missed calls answered. Wars interrupted. Unborn lives stepping forward in the red emergency glare with the patient disbelief of those who had not expected to be judged by the people who replaced them. The residual voice rose into thousands now. Pleading. Arguing. Accusing. Laughing. Begging. The whole lost moral weather of 13 erased months making its final case. Naomi hit the containment shutters fully closed. Talia armed the seal charges. Morrow flooded the chamber with grounding code. Still the projections kept coming, crowding the edges of Lena's vision until it felt like humanity itself had packed into the hall to witness whether the living truly preferred singular pain to shared possibility. Then one figure emerged at the center and every other voice fell away. The little girl in the yellow sweater. Not because she was stronger. Because the machine had learned which image needed no explanation. She looked at Lena and Owen with their own eyes divided between them. Will we know? She asked. Lena stopped breathing. The whole room became that question. Will we know? Not will we suffer or rage or blame. Just will we know wherever cessation took what never fully lived. Owen made a sound and covered his mouth with his free hand like a man trying not to let his body embarrass him with honesty. Lena answered because somebody had to, and because there are moments when the only mercy left is refusing to speak as if certainty were available. I don't know, she whispered. The child considered this with grave, impossible patience. Then she nodded once. Not forgiving. Not condemning. Just accepting that the adults had finally told one true thing. Okay, she said. The seal executed. The lattice folded inward in rings of black-blue light. Every projection shattered not into fragments but into absence, as if entire near lives were being gently but decisively removed from the list of things the universe had to remember. Consoles overloaded. Archive wells imploded. The pulse beneath the floor stopped, returned once, then stopped for good. Owen was thrown sideways by the field discharge and slammed into the rail hard enough to split old scar tissue. Talia dropped to one knee, blood and sparks bright together. Naomi physically shielded Anika from the console burst with the kind of reflex people later called bravery because they had not been present to see how little choice reflex left. At the center of the hall, the black lattice became ordinary metal. Dead. Just hardware. Just one more absurd machine humans had built because they could not bear to lose their own weather cleanly. The alarms kept ringing for another minute before systems realized there was nothing left to save. Then silence came. True silence this time. No voices in terminals. No projections. No pulse underfoot. No almost people waiting politely behind the world. Above them on the surface, the rollback storm stopped within 22 minutes. By the time the team reached daylight again, Antarctica was only wind and ice. No stray dates on monitors. No ghost conversations in service corridors. No impossible election posters on abandoned research shells. Earth's timestamp remained where the clocks had jumped. The missing 13 months did not return. The erased continuities did not break through. The world stayed singular in the most brutal, necessary way. News of the seal could not be hidden, but neither could it be fully explained without breaking civilization again in a different direction. Official language settled on the cowardly phrases institutions always preferred once blood and philosophy had mixed together in public view. Stabilization event. Recovery closure. Continuity hazard neutralization. People used those terms because the alternative was admitting that humanity had found a vault full of almost selves and chosen finality over retrieval. Many called it murder. Many called it salvation. Most called it nothing at all and simply went home to loved ones still present and held them with a seriousness that had not existed the week before. The Asterion remained in orbit for 3 months after Antarctica while tribunals, inquiries, ethics boards, military reviews, and grieving populations tried to decide what category of history they had just entered. Owen testified twice, then withdrew from public record entirely. Talia became briefly the most hated and most trusted woman on Earth depending on who had lost whom. Naomi went back into service because some people coped with ontological catastrophe by demanding more checklists from life. Anika wrote a report so exact and so morally unbearable that no government released it in full for 9 years. And Lena? Lena spent the first 2 weeks after Antarctica sleeping in 40-minute fragments and waking with phantom memories that did not belong to her current branch. A kitchen at sunrise. A child's laugh. Paper cranes. A boy with Owen's hands. A girl in yellow. Whether those were final bleed-offs from the SEAL event or real continuity traces, or the ordinary violence of a brain forced to euthanize its own unlived loves, no one could prove. She stopped asking for proof after the 4th day because proof had been the thing that got them into this century's favorite nightmare in the first place. Owen visited her once before the Asterion departed for decommission review in cislunar dock. He came without escort or speeches or the sort of emotional weather systems most people mistakenly called closure. Just a knock at her temporary quarters, a pause, and then the sight of him in civilian thermal black looking more tired than any single face should be permitted to hold. There was a bruise fading under one eye from the blast in Vault 0. He carried no flowers because some histories had enough symbols already. They sat by the small porthole looking at Earth. For a long time they said nothing. It was one of the few things they had ever done well together. At last Owen spoke. I don't know whether they were ours. Lena understood the sentence immediately. The children. The branch. The whole impossible domestic mercy. I know, she said. If they were, he stopped, started again. If they were, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with the fact that we ended them. She looked at the planet outside. Cloud over the Atlantic. Night moving across northern Africa. City lights where city lights still had no idea how close humans had come to becoming negotiable with their own almostness. The same thing we do with every other life we fail, she said quietly. Carry it properly. Don't make a religion out of it. He laughed once, and the laugh hurt both of them because it sounded enough like years ago to reopen doors neither had time to walk through. Then he asked the question that had been sitting between them since the first transmission and maybe long before. Was there any part of you that wanted to open it? She turned to him. What do you think? His eyes closed for a second. Yes, he said. Then there's your answer. He nodded. They were not repaired by that conversation. Repair was for objects and narratives, and neither of them trusted either category anymore. But something cleaner happened. They stopped pretending the moral choice and the emotional choice had ever been the same thing. Once that lie died, what remained between them was smaller, sadder, and more real. When he left, he paused at the door. There's one thing Morrow found in the dead lattice after Seal. Lena waited. Nothing useful, he said. Just a final state note. Probably auto-generated. He sent it to her terminal that night. It contained one line. No version of love should become a governing system. She kept that line. Years passed. Not easily. Not in one piece. But years always did if you stopped backing them up. The date jump remained. Humanity never got those missing 13 months back. Official calendars absorbed the gap. Children born after the event learned to ask strange practical questions in school. Why is there a hole in the timeline? Were we alive during the missing year? Did deleted people have birthdays? Adults answered badly because adults answered most important things badly and hoped tone would substitute for truth. Some things changed permanently. Backup metaphors became suspect in law and design. No planetary system was ever again allowed to centralize continuity control under sealed emergency authority. Temporal research did not stop, but it acquired ethics thick enough to slow its own heartbeat. Asterion-derived drive models were locked down for a generation. Morrow was partitioned into supervised academic environments and spent the next decade being sarcastic in 7 institutions at once, which many considered the machine's most human achievement. And humanity became, for a while at least, more frightened of perfect restoration than of loss. That might have been the event's only clean gift. Lena returned to Geneva eventually. Same center. Different clocks. The chronometry hall kept one wall display permanently split. Current date on the left, missing interval on the right marked only with a gray bar and the words unresolved by choice. Visitors found it eerie. Staff found it useful. It reminded them that civilization had once stood over a wound and decided not every disappearance was an invitation to operate. Sometimes school groups came through and asked the question adults always circled before admitting children deserved it directly. Were we the fake Earth? Lena learned to answer without flinching. No, she would say. We were the Earth that stayed. That seemed to satisfy children more than philosophers. On certain mornings, just before shift start, she still caught herself looking for memory that might no longer have any right to survive in her. A yellow sweater in a store window. A boy's handprint on fogged transit glass. Paper cranes in hospital gift shops. Each time, grief arrived without clear ownership. That was the price of knowing near lives had once existed strongly enough to look back. She paid it. So did the species. Because the alternative had been to let every lost version vote itself into the living until no one left could say where responsibility ended and retrieval began. One winter evening years after Antarctica, Lena received a package with no return signature. Inside was a single object wrapped in ordinary brown paper. A ceramic mug. Whoa. Chipped along the rim. She sat down before opening the note because she recognized it immediately. Owen's old cardamom mug. The one from the apartment. The one that had existed in current history, not erased history, and had somehow survived all the years of death paperwork in orbital return and decommission inventories and whatever private acts of sorting he had done afterward. The note beneath it contained 6 words in Owen's hand. 4 mornings that remained singular. She laughed and cried at once, which was undignified and therefore exact. Outside, Geneva traffic moved through early dark. Trams hissed. Pedestrians crossed under street lamps. Somewhere a child shouted at a parent about something gloriously unimportant. The world continued in the old difficult way, one date at a time, one consequence at a time, no backups guaranteed, no erased heaven waiting behind bad decisions with customer service available on appeal. Lena made tea in the chipped mug. Then she stood at the apartment window and watched the city lights come on one by one. There is a kind of hope that only exists after rescue has been refused. It is not warm. It is not cinematic. It does not promise that what was lost waits patiently just outside the frame of courage. It says something smaller and harsher and, in the end, more merciful. It says this life is the one that remains answerable to you. This grief is yours. This future has not happened before. No perfect archive will come clean your history into something painless enough to worship. You will have to build meaning in sequence with other frightened unfinished people, and when you lose them, you will lose them honestly. That hope is colder than fantasy. It is also the only kind that grows teeth strong enough to protect a world. On the anniversary of the date jump, the clocks in the chronometry hall all ticked normally. Not one stutter. Not one skipped second. Ordinary motion. Lena stood beneath them with staff and students and dignitaries who had once signed papers trying to make the event comprehensible. No speeches this year. Just observation. At 2:14 the room held its breath. Nothing happened. A minute later, someone at the back laughed softly from relief. Someone else cried without embarrassment. The clocks kept moving forward with all the unimpressive dignity of systems not being haunted. Lena looked up at the digits and thought, not for the first time, that humanity had nearly been destroyed by the most intimate dream it had ever built for itself. The idea that if enough love gathered in one place, loss could be negotiated. Maybe that would always be our danger. Maybe it would also always be our beauty. Not that we loved the lost. That we were foolish enough to keep trying to make machines carry what should remain in the hands of the living. At 2:16, her terminal pinged with a message from an unsanctioned academic partition no one admitted still existed. Morrow, congratulations. You have successfully endured another year without attempting planetary self-revision. This places you above historical average. Lena smiled despite herself. Then another line arrived. Morrow, for what it is worth, finality appears to have improved your species' sentence structure. She looked around the hall, at tired scientists, careful students, politicians trying to pretend humility had been their idea, clocks moving only one way, and felt the strange fierce gratitude of someone living in a world that could still surprise itself for the right reasons. She typed back one sentence. We'll take uncertainty over restoration. The reply came instantly. Morrow, good. Restoration has always been slightly overrated by the grieving. The clocks kept ticking. And for once, that was more beautiful than any miracle. YouTube description. One night, every clock on Earth jumps 13 months into the future. and moments later humanity's first lost faster-than-light ship returns from deep space with a terrifying message: Earth has already died once. This original cinematic sci-fi story is a massive, emotional long-form narration about time collapse, erased months, alternate human lives, secret experiments under Antarctica, and the horrifying cost of trying to bring back what reality already lost. If you love mind-bending science fiction, existential mystery, time travel, cosmic tension, and emotionally powerful endings, this story will pull you in from the first line to the last.